the watcher influence is also interesting, John, because at a neighboring site at Karahan Tepe, now earlier I just mentioned Kara Tepe. This is a different site closer to Göbekli Tepe. It's called Karahan Tepe, and they found an anthropomorphic image um, that which is a human-like stone figure that actually depicted six fingers on this stone image. There's other places, a few other places around that have depicted this six-fingered stone imagery.
The world keeps lying, but he won't retreat on his quest for truth. Yeah. Truth, quest for truth. They can't stop me, they can't block me. Moving through, got that fire, they can't block me. Quest for truth, breaking chains, making waves. That's what I do. When they hate, I create.
Welcome, everybody. I am John Pounders, and you're listening to Pounders Quest today. And I have a special guest, a friend of mine that I think we've been known each other for probably almost a decade at least. And I've been out to Glen Rose, Texas. He's shown me very cool dinosaur prints along the Paluxy River, showed my son there, and I'm really thankful for him, and I'm glad to have him. He's recently written a book on Göbekli Tepe. He's an archaeologist, an amazing resource on this stuff. So welcome, Aaron, to the show, man. We're glad to have you.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be on the show.
Well, if I didn't mention it already, tell people what they should know about you.
Well, yeah, that's a I'll try to narrow it down. So basically, I've had two passions in life that I've really been involved with. One is in a career as a flight medic on a 911 helicopter. The other one has been in biblical archaeology, and that has really led me down some ancient pathways and exploration of the past, in search of kind of forbidden archaeology, if you will, just things that mainstream archaeology won't like to investigate or talk about even. Those are some of the things that I like to go and do, and then just bring back, the information and then just put it on the table for discussion. Um, and So yeah, I've been part of the work here at the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas for decades and decades. We've made advancements in our microscopy lab, and we're on the basically leading the charge for research in dinosaur soft tissue at the Creation Evidence Museum. So lots of neat things are happening here. If you've never been to Glen Rose, I'd highly encourage you to come. And we're home to Dinosaur Valley State Park. We're home to uh, we're the dinosaur capital of Texas, and of course the Creation Evidence Museum.
Yeah, that whole museum was awesome. You took me there too to check that out. And the things that I saw there astounded me because you know this, and I'm going to ask you this question because I think that it's of value because there's so many people that have this real conspiratorial idea about dinosaurs and a lot of different conspiratorial ideas about dinosaurs. But one of the most extreme is that there was no such thing as dinosaurs. All the bones and stuff are fake, or they're plasters, or there's no full skeleton. And being somebody that I know personally, that I know that you've been a part of excavations and you've seen the prints, you've walked me down through them. I've seen them myself. I mean, amazing stuff. But what can you say to those people based off of your expertise? Is any of what that I just said valid?
Regarding are they authentic? Are dinosaurs real? Um, yeah, for sure. They are real. You know, God says in the Bible that He created um, all the land animals on day number six, and this includes dinosaurs. And He verifies that when He says, "And everything that I've made is good." And so we see that even in Job chapter 40, when God is talking to Job, he says, I think in chapter 41, he says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee." And he goes on to make this, description of this creature we think is more descriptive of a dinosaur. Now, in the footnotes of your Bible, it's probably going to say this is a hippo or an hippopotamus. But God describes this creature as having a tail like a cedar tree, very long. And so he is the chief of the ways of God. So this is saying that this is a majestic creature that God made along with man. And he's asking Job, can you describe this creature? And then he goes on in chapter, I think, 41 to describe Leviathan. So, yes, dinosaurs were real. I've excavated some 15 dinosaurs in the northwest parts of Colorado. And I've excavated hundreds of dinosaur tracks here in the riverbed, which is a limestone riverbed here locally on the Paluxy River in Glen Rose, Texas. And I can tell you that dinosaurs are real. You've walked in the tracks, you've seen them, and they go under multiple layers of limestone ledges. So this is definitely a creature that used to exist, and God had involved that in part of His creation.
Yeah, I agree. And that was just a side note of this whole entire podcast because I know that as soon as we mention dinosaurs, a portion of the crowd is going to be talking about this. And so I wanted your opinion and also your expertise on this. I think like maybe the last time we saw each other before the Spiracy Con, we were, talking about these things and you'd shown me a T-Rex, I believe that you were part of an excavation on. Is that correct? It wasn't a whole T-Rex, but it was on the wall at the Creation Museum. Am I remembering that right?
That no, it's not a T-Rex. Are you talking about part of the leg
Yes.
that was in the museum? Yeah, that was
Yep.
from a that was from a theropod dinosaur that we excavated in Colorado. But here locally, we do have something very similar to a T-Rex, but it's not a T-Rex. It's called an Acrocanthosaurus, and that means high spine lizards. They're bipedal, which means they walk on two legs. They're theropod, which means they have three toes. They look very similar to a T-Rex, but they have dermal frills going all the way down its back. So it's Acrocanthosaurus, and those are the particular prints here that we have. We have another couple of different dinosaurs here locally, but that's the one of the main ones is Acrocanthosaurus. They're
It
actually
looked like
rarer than a T-Rex, actually.
okay. It looked like a giant turkey foot, man. When I
Yeah,
the cast that I
that's
have, it looks like a
yeah,
giant turkey foot. It's huge. It's like,
yeah,
massive, like bigger than my foot. So
yeah.
I
That's
think maybe I can't remember.
Acrocanthosaurus.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
very cool. But yeah, man, so I really wanted to talk to you mostly about Göbekli Tepe because that, and if I'm pronouncing that right, I hope I am, because I always get
that's right.
people always
Yeah,
get mad at me for pronouncing things wrong. But Göbekli Tepe is one of the most profound discoveries, I believe, in the last 100 years, probably, of a city that nobody knew existed, that seems to be more ancient than what we would describe civilizations to be. And I don't know that to be true, but I want your explanation on this. I really at Conspiracy Con, I wanted to get a signed copy of your book, but they were all gone by the time I even got a chance to get around to your table there. So I'm going to have to get one of these, but I would love to hear what you think about Göbekli Tepe, and I'll just ask questions intermittently where I'm curious.
yeah. So Göbekli Tepe. You're exactly right. You said it right. Göbekli Tepe. In Turkish means potbelly hill or navel hill. This is a site in southeastern Turkey. This is biblical Asia Minor, by the way, where Paul made some of his first missionary journeys into this part of the world. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in the mid '90s and first excavated by German field archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who's passed away now. But I think it was in the '60s. It got mislabeled as a Byzantine cemetery. They forgot about it and moved on. Well, when the local landowner who was farming that area hit a big stone with his plow, couldn't move it, and uncovered the corner and realized it was a huge stone. He went to the authorities in Shanlurfa. They came back and realized, hey, there's something big here. Dr. Klaus Schmidt was called in. He had just finished excavations in the nearby region, and he immediately recognized it as Neolithic, as another Neolithic site, which there are is pretty common in this region of the world. But it was not a Byzantine cemetery. And when they began excavating, um, Dr. Schmidt realized that this was a site that was uh, completely baffling to archaeologists. They were discovering things at this site, such as megalithic architecture that was not supposed to be in the Stone Age.
Wow. So obviously, we believe biblically, I think that people probably did have that kind of skills back then. I mean, I know that you believe probably similar to me about the Nephilim and about the giants that were of old. Um, is this part in Turkey? I remember in the book of Revelation, it talks about where Satan's throne is, and I believe is referring to Asia Minor in that area of that church. Is that the same area, or is this completely different spot that we would
It's
have
in
this?
it's in a Yeah, this is in a different spot. Um, but again, this goes back to the very beginnings of the very first book in the Bible of Genesis. Now, we're the first to really come out with the complete book on Göbekli Tepe from a biblical perspective, and this is exactly what the book is. It's called Decoding Göbekli Tepe: Biblical Anatolia and the Watchers. And what my co-author, Dr. Judd Burton, and I have looked at this site for almost 6 years, very intensively, and and we realized that there were some things happening here at the site that was totally um, confusing archaeologists. The megalithic architecture is one that shouldn't really be in the Stone Age. It shows a division of labor. It shows organization. And again, if this is Stone Age Neolithic, well, people at this time, are hunter gatherers. They've learned how to, create, and fire and hunt and gather. They're not supposed to be able to build megalithic architecture like this. And secondly, this is showing a religious ideology brought the people together first before the advent of agriculture. So in the textbooks, it says that agriculture came first and now the people came. They developed cities, a community, defensive positions to defend themselves and their food, walls, and then after all that, religion came and then people did that. That's not true. Religious ideology brought the people together first at Göbekli Tepe, and there's a commonality, not just at Göbekli Tepe, but in the entire region that is connected through um, through architecture and is connected through sacred cosmology. And so we see that entwined into their architecture. We in the Specifically in the T column pillars that they've created. Göbekli Tepe is not the sole site for that. As a matter of fact, Novaly Chori was one of the first sites that they discovered the big T pillars at that site. And Novaly Chori is supposedly older in dating than Göbekli Tepe. And since they have found sites that are supposedly older than that, than both of those. But the connection is the architecture and then the motif systems that they've uncovered there in the artwork. There's a lot of zoomorphic artwork there that depicts various animals, and then a lot of anthropomorphic images that are often phallic. But so this is the essence of the book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, because we wanted to give we wanted to give an answer through the lens of the Bible about who these people were and why were they at this particular site and what they were doing.
Interesting. And so obviously, you can deduce from this that most people uh, probably don't want this out in academia because it goes against what they've been teaching people all along. I would imagine that that's part of the reason UNESCO covered some of this up. Maybe I could be wrong on that. You know more about UNESCO than I would, dealing with archaeological sites, because they pretty much, manage all of them almost. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's part of the reason why they shut down excavation of Göbekli Tepe? Because from what I understand, I think you're the one that told me this possibly, or I heard you on an interview saying it, that they've really only excavated a very small portion of what all this could be.
Yeah, they haven't stopped excavations. They've slowed it down dramatically, though. So right now, roughly 10% of the site has been excavated, and that's been since the mid 90s. It took about 10 years alone to excavate enclosure D, which is where the two central T pillars are that are 18 and a half feet tall. They're anthropomorphic. This is the exact enclosure and these two pillars that we identify in the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe. But they have definitely slowed down excavations. From what the archaeologists have said publicly in interviews, is that they do it to preserve the site for future generations to excavate. But look, at the previous current rate of excavations, it was going to take over 100 years to excavate the site, maybe up to 150 years to excavate that site at the previous rate. Now that they've slowed that back and pulled back on that, the site's not going to be fully excavated within our lifetime or maybe even in the next generation, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of information that's still underground. Most of Göbekli Tepe is still under the dirt.
And so, where would you date this in comparison to the pyramids?
Well, that's a great question because um, the pyramids, I think, go back to, and I'd have to go back and look again, but I think it's around 20. Let me just look at I think it's 2350 BC. Let me just double check my reference on that real quick, John. This is kind of the accepted chronology for the pyramids, and I want to make sure that I tell you exactly the conventional dating for it. If I can find my map. Um, this is my timeline here. And let me just see the conventional dating. Yeah, 23. Let's see. Well, I didn't put it in there. So, um, I
let's
think
just
it's
say,
probably
let's
around,
just say around there. Yeah, I think it's
yeah, I
around
think
there. I
it's
can
around
look it up real quick too.
2500 BC, somewhere in there. Um,
I'll
okay,
look it up while you're talking about it.
on the conventional dating of this, they put, so if Egypt's pyramids are probably around 2500 BC, give or take, the conventional dating for Göbekli Tepe is 9800 BC.
Okay,
So
yeah. So it's
thousands
saying
of
27. It's saying 2780 BCE on what I'm looking up now.
27,
So you're right. You're really close.
yeah.
So
So 2700 or so. So that's about right.
do you
That's
believe that?
accepted.
Do you believe that about the Egypt? Sorry, there's a delay, and these headphones are Bluetooth. So if I'm cutting you off, I'm really not meaning to. These I need to get
Yeah, that's
wired
right.
headphones. So do you believe that that's the probably the date of the pyramids, or I think it's Graham Hancock that had the theory, maybe other people too, that had the theory about the it being much older, at least the Sphinx as well, because of you can see like where water had
Yeah.
eroded certain parts of the thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Dr. Robert Schoch did some research on the water erosion of the Sphinx, and he pushes the Sphinx uh, way on back there, thousands of years back. Um, That's just based off the water erosion. Now we have to keep in mind that this is an area that that used to be a very fertile region. They had rain, they had crops. The Nile flooded. Um, Not like it is today. It's just it's all just dry, and sand there. That was not like that back at the time period. I don't know if I agree with the dating pushing it back that far. I think on a biblical timeline, around 2500 BC is probably a little bit closer, depending on if you use the Masoretic text timeline or the Septuagint timeline. Um, I don't think you can push it back thousands of years in the past. And this is exactly where they put Göbekli Tepe around 96 or 9800 BC. Um, the dating that we use is we go by two chronologies, and this is the chronology map that I put in the back of the book uh, for you to look at the timeline. So I used two timelines. I used the Masoretic text timeline and the Septuagint timeline to see where biblically you could put Göbekli Tepe on the timeline. And amazingly enough, John, it's just um, it's just right around the time of the pyramids, not Stone Age, what they consider pre-pottery Neolithic A. Now,
So they're
depending
dating
on
Göbekli Tepe wrong, is what you're saying.
well, remember this is in a secular conventional dating system. This is where they're putting it because this is where they date the Younger Dryas event as well. And the Younger Dryas event does coincide with Göbekli Tepe. I just think they're looking in the wrong timeline. I think they've got the events down correctly, but when you line that up with the biblical events, we see that the mechanism for the Younger Dryas is the Noahic deluge. That's the precipitating factor, and then the
Mm.
Younger Dryas then coincides with the biblical ice age that happens afterwards. This is all
Mm.
part of the Younger Dryas event as well, which lasted about 1,000 years in time. But I think biblically, no matter what timeline you use, either the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, they come out relatively very close together. The one thing that I found interesting was that when I was looking at the Masoretic text timeline, there's no room for the Ice Age in there. So even if you don't call it 1,000 years, let's just say you call it, 500 to 750 years, there's really no room on the Masoretic text timeline to put the Ice Age after the flood. So by the time you go from the flood, if you use Sir Bishop Ussher's creation date of 4004 BC, and then you go to the flood at 2348 BC, that only puts the flood and the Tower of Babel at less than 100 years apart, like 98 years apart. And
Which
I
doesn't seem.
think that's problematic. Now, I'm not dogging the Masoretic text. I use the Masoretic text. I study out of it. I'm just saying I think in this particular instance, they somehow the dating or the timeline got wrong, and I think Usher was off on that, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. Because I'll just tell you now. Because the Septuagint, when you use the Septuagint timeline, I think it preserves the Old Testament numbers, at least in the genealogies. I think it's either Genesis 10. I think it's Genesis 10 or Genesis 11, where it's got those genealogies,
Yeah,
and it
Genesis
cuts off
10.
the yeah Genesis 10. It cuts off. There's like six generations, and it cuts off 100 years off of each generation.
Mm.
So you're losing at least 650 years if you include. I think it's Nahor in that. Uh, you lose about 600 to 650 years of time right there. Uh, that's what the Masoretic text in the Genesis 10 version lops off 100 years off those generations. The Septuagint has preserved that. So it says, when so and so begat so and so in their long names, he was 130 years old. but the Masoretic text in that same passage will say so and so begat so and so, and he was 30 years old. 100 years
Mm,
disappears. So
mm,
when you look at the overall time frame of the Septuagint, it adds about 1,300 to 1,400 years total, which gives you all the room you need for the Ice Age up to 1,000 years. So it fits very nicely right there. So I think you have to take the best of both. Yeah, I think the Septuagint has preserved the genealogies, at least in this case in Genesis 10. But look, it doesn't really matter which one you use. The dating of Göbekli Tepe is very, very close on either timeline. So it
mhm,
doesn't go back to the Stone Age, 12,000 years ago. It's really dated around the Bronze Age,
mm,
the time of the biblical Bronze Age, which puts it, from either 2,300 to 2,100 BC, very close to the dating of the pyramids, maybe just right before the pyramids, um, and several generations before the pyramids were built. So if you trace the lineage of Noah and his sons and Mizraim and how Mizraim was the founder of Egypt and all this, I think Göbekli Tepe is right before those events, but right after a generation or two after the Tower of Babel. And this
mm,
is why, because we see the dispersion of the people already. Number one, they've dispersed from that area of the Tower of Babel. Two, they have a different language, which I propose in the book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, is alluvian logograms. And I think there is language at the site. Now you have to understand the conventional dating of Göbekli Tepe is pre-pottery Neolithic A, which means that it's before the invention of pottery. It puts it before the invention of the wheel and before the invention of writing. But I think there is writing at Göbekli Tepe. Now there's no pottery found at Göbekli Tepe. That's why they say it's Stone Age. It's pre-pottery Neolithic A. However, in some pre-pottery sites around Göbekli Tepe, they have discovered pottery. So just because there's an absence of pottery doesn't really mean that there's not going to be any, you know, pottery discovered in the future and future excavations, or perhaps they were just using the natural resources around them, which is just all stone. And that's why you have a lot of stoneware vessels around the site. Thousands of pestles and mortars, things to grind the wild wheat, the wild grain, the wild barley there at the site. Thousands of sickle blades that they discovered there as well. So they were right along the ancient plain of Haran, which is part of the Fertile Crescent. About 9 miles away is modern day Sheinlerfa. This is biblical Edessa, but this is Abraham's Ur. This is where Abraham grew up in this area. His father Terah had worshipped the moon god. We know this through, also in the region throughout archaeology, bears out the archaeological evidence of often a crescent standard, a moon standard, flanked by two males in worship. We also know that the city of Jericho, which is contemporaneous to the time of Göbekli Tepe and Abraham's Ur, I think that's in this area, also coincides with moon worship. We know the city of Jericho was worshiping, the people there were worshiping the moon as well. Um, so, uh, I so in other words, we have this we have this chronology problem here because one we have writing, which I'm proposing that are alluvian logograms on the stones at Göbekli Tepe, which there should be no alluvian logograms. Now, people may ask, what's alluvian? There's a culture that lived contemporaneous with the Hittites. They were neighbors, and they were called the Luvians. And there's not a lot known about the Luvians because uh, uh, a lot of um, a lot of their history is still not known yet. We do know some history, but there's just so much there. There's not a whole lot of Luvian experts. There are some. There's a handful of Luvian experts that knows the Luvian language, but this is a particular type of Anatolian hieroglyphics that used that used a symbol to represent a word. And so we see on the stones at Göbekli Tepe a specific Luwian logogram for Deus. This is a Latin transliteration that means God. It's very clear. It's a known symbol in Luwian logograms. Um, Not all Luwian logograms have been deciphered. There's thousands or hundreds, at least, perhaps thousands more that have not been deciphered. But we do know what this particular symbol means. It means Deus, which means God. We see this very same logogram on the stone at Göbekli Tepe. In 1943, at a neighboring site called Kara Tepe, archaeologists in the 1940s discovered, you guessed it, Luwian logograms at that pre-pottery Neolithic site. So there's an
Oh,
interesting tie here, which means that if that's Luwian, who were contemporaneous with the Hittites, which the Hittites actually adopted the Luwian logogram, it was only used. They had a cuneiform everyday language that they used, written and spoken. But this Luwian logogram, they spoke Luwian, but the specific writing in the logogram language, which is pictographic short form, was only reserved for writing on monumental stone.
mm,
Why? Because this was an area considered one sacred text on stone. They were literally writing this in stone. And so if you don't have a lot of room, you need to make it count and you want it to last, you're going to write in logograms. And so this is exactly some of the things that we're seeing at Göbekli Tepe.
man, that's so interesting to me. Luvian, I'm gonna have to really research that a lot. I know you said there's not much, but man, that's something that I'm really not familiar with. It reminds me of what some people were considering some sort of old Tartarian type languages, like the circles and little cross things and stuff. I don't know if that's connected anyway. I'm going to look into this. This is wild to me. I
No,
wrote a
it's
couple things. Yeah, I wrote a couple things down. Megalithic structures. You mentioned that there are megalithic structures here at Göbekli Tepe. And a lot of people would connect some of these structures, these massive structures, to the giants and to cultures, maybe even the Watchers before that. What would your thoughts on that be when you see that megalithic architecture? Where does your mind go, and who created those things?
Yeah, so this is where my colleague really comes in to play here, Dr. Judd Burton. He gets into the Watcher influence at the site, but I can tell you um, these are megalithic structures, multi-ton structures, 20-ton stones,
Mm,
quarried from a quarter of a mile away, drug uphill, were cut out in a monolithic stone, which means it was one solid piece of stone, not multiple pieces and erected together. It was cut out of bedrock at the quarry as one solid piece, drug uphill, and then set into place, into position, which some of them were still in situ when they were excavated, which means they were discovered in the original standing place. These are huge stones. It's very difficult to do. The Watcher influences is a really interesting angle because Dr. Klaus Schmidt saw the two central figures in Enclosure D as supernatural entities. Um, I think he was very, very close um, to the interpretation. The Watcher influence is also interesting, John, because at a neighboring site at Karahan Tepe, now earlier I just mentioned Kara Tepe. This is a different site closer to Göbekli Tepe. It's called Karahan Tepe, and they found an anthropomorphic image um, that which is a human-like stone figure that actually depicted six fingers on this stone image. There's other places, a few other places around that have depicted this six-fingered stone imagery. We see this is also connected to the imagery Leem, which it describes, I think, in Numbers, that the Anakim had six fingers and six toes, 24 digits in all. So it's interesting that this is in the archaeological record. Um, so this has some ties back to the Genesis account of the Watchers who produced the race of giants, and we see that they they had six fingers and six toes. Why would these stones at Karahan Tepe depict a stone image with six fingers? So that's very very interesting. They have not found any giant bones or anything like that there. Um, that that would be concrete evidence. But I think it's very plausible, and this is what Dr. Burton gets into. I think it's very plausible that they had a watcher influence uh, in their belief system. How do you get from a Stone Age culture, which is culturally reset at the flood? They're having to start over. They get culturally slammed, reset again by another global disaster called the biblical ice age, or in modern day terms, it's called the Younger Dryas event. They get culturally reset and hit hard again with another, you know, worldwide disaster, if you will, when this happens, because it forces them to move, it forces them to disperse again. The fertile crescent is no longer fertile. There's no greenery. You know the uh, the ocean levels drop between 200 and 400 feet. Global temperatures take a dive of about at least 30 degrees globally worldwide. Things become very colder and very dry, and I think they're forced to move with the migration of the animals. Uh, in the book, I list an epic. It's called the Karasog epic, and this is there's bears out in archaeology where it describes this 1,000 year storm that this global event happened. It specifically talks about this storm, and it's a perfect fit for what they experienced during this Younger Dryas event. What I think dovetails with the biblical ice age. Um, so there's a lot of things happening here, but the Nephilim watcher influence that Judd proposes in the book goes back to the very beginnings of Genesis. We see that God creates everything in Genesis 1, things are rocking along, sin comes into the earth, but then Genesis 6, you have some major things happening right here. And then of course, in the apocryphal books, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees and some of these other apocryphal books, talks about more specifically about these watchers and their influence and the intervention into the affairs of mankind.
Yeah. So interesting. A couple questions I want to ask you about this site, and I've not been there. You've been there. I've seen pictures, and I keep seeing something that looks like a bird. Am I seeing that correctly? There's like a bird depiction on here, and some of this stuff. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, there's vulture iconography, and there's another type of unknown bird. We think it may be vultures or some kind of condor or something. I think that's on Pillar 43 you're referencing there.
Yeah, that's what I'm referencing. The reason I'm asking that is because you talked about the six finger aspect of it. And when I hear that, it recalls a recent discovery in Jerusalem. When I say recent, in the last maybe 20 years, probably 20 years, of a six fingered shaman mummy that they found in Jerusalem, I believe in Jerusalem. And the shamanism, I've studied that actually pretty intensively over the last year. This is something that I'm really familiar with. And it goes back to this epic of Lugal Bande. I don't know if you've heard of that epic where Lugal
Uh-uh.
Bande is basically, it's as old as Gilgamesh. It's a very old text. And he's this dwarf, but he's a warrior. He's a warrior dwarf, kind of like you would see from Lord of the Rings. And they lived in the area of Ur, and they would fight off these hordes constantly, and they were always fighting off hordes. And in the epic, to make a long story short, he gets sick, goes in a cave, drinks some liquids, and he takes the trip up the cosmic tree and meets the Anzu bird and forms a union Not a kind of union. I guess just a friendship with this Anzu bird protects the children. The Anzu bird grants him any basically a wish that he wants, and he wishes to be fast when he's on Earth so he can fight better. And he says that he'll the Anzu birds images in every temple. Like they'll be worshipped. The Anzu bird will be worshipped here on Earth. And I know that Anzu bird is something you find at a lot of locations, especially like in South America, in places where shamanism is very popular, but shamanism is all over the place. And I just wondered if you saw in this at all, like something that you could say maybe there is a shamanistic connection other than the six fingers there in Göbekli Tepe.
I haven't heard about that. That's pretty interesting. Um, no, I don't know, John. I don't know if there's any relation to that or not. There is definitely a lot of vulture iconography at Göbekli Tepe, but I write in the book Decoding Göbekli Tepe how symbols uh, tend to have the same meaning throughout different cultures, and this is true as specifically with the vulture, the serpent uh, as well. The serpent has was often referred to as the giver of wisdom. Um, the vulture in this case is linked with the process of life and death and regeneration, and it's linked back to Eve, incidentally, um, and uh, they used this iconography, I think, on specifically in Pillar 43 with the condor or the vulture, that's basically telling a story about death and the regeneration back to eternal life, back through the mother, which they had deified as Eve, and they symbolize Eve through the iconography of the vulture. So I get into all that in the book, but it's a story of death and regeneration back to the afterlife, but they're doing it back through their mother Eve, which they have deified. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was maybe some kind of tie there with that. Um, words. I think it was Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, who had basically mocked that were using chants, what he called peep, peeping and muttering, because they believed that the shades or the dead spirits spoke in um, uh, as if they were birds. So it'd be through peeping and muttering. And Isaiah basically is is condemning that type of acts of this what you would call shamanistic type of worship. But if you can think about if you're watching a movie or something on Netflix, and anytime there's a lot of symbolism even today, and if you think about some of the shows um, now, and when you see like a crow or a raven or something in this type of context, that often represents a demonic spirit through the symbolism of the bird, which is why they're there in the movies. So I don't know if you've ever noticed that or not, but that's
Yeah, yeah.
exactly that's exactly what that symbolism is about. It's depicting spirits. So interesting information about that.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little bit more that ties in exactly what you're saying. So what you're talking about kind of is like a phoenix iconography that rises from the ashes, reborn all the time, and that's exactly what the Anzu bird represents. In fact, the cosmic tree is uh, drawn and also depicted as at the base, at the roots, is the serpent that's at the roots, and you'll see like the serpents at the roots. And as you go up the tree, at the top, you have the nest with the Anzu bird and the stars. And the Anzu bird is described as being able to take the form of serpent and also bird. and it was
Wow.
depicted in Babylonian and stuff like that. Actually, it's the female goddess worship is exactly what the Anzu bird represents, which makes it even more interesting. But I found that through looking at, like, I guess just different religions, that actually shamanism is probably the most ancient religion other than the religion of worshiping the Most High God, because it spans way, way back, has to do with the six fingers, has to do with all of the stuff you're talking about, all of the worship of the goddess and the worship of the serpent and the bird. And it makes you wonder, like, how connected all of that stuff is. And it's just crazy because now in local, in modern times, you have this DMT revolution, and that's what a lot of people, shamans, their goal is to take you on that trip up the cosmic tree, and that's where the whole DMT thing comes from in shamanism, and that's
Mm.
where the story of Epic of Lugal Bande is a version of that story. It's an old version of that story. And so they take you up that cosmic tree. And I don't think it's a coincidence that people are starting to get back into that whole DMT realm, and they all see the same figure. It's really strange stuff. Um, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that, but just some more information about it. I thought that there was going to be something that was found there that just seems like it ties back to, some people call it shamanism, paganism, whatever you want to call it, going back to the old gods, the old the the watchers or fallen ones or whatever.
Yeah. Well, at Göbekli Tepe, I think this is the very beginnings of Baal worship. We
Mm,
identify the two central pillars in enclosure D, and look, this is post Tower of Babel. They
mhm,
have they have already started following other gods. They've lost their Axis Mundi connection in the Garden of Eden that they had, and now they have deified their two central ancestors, but specifically Mother Eve,
mhm,
because this is the only way to get eternally reborn, because Eve's the only one that can give birth.
mhm,
So now they do consider Adam as a central, father ancestor, but only Adam gets regenerated back through Eve and through all the descendants
mhm,
through Eve. So this is exactly. I think they're practicing some kind of ritual or libation ceremonies in this enclosure. Why? Because in the stone vessels they found at the uh, other enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, they found shallow stone vessels, or stone vessels with channeled grooves around the rim for draining liquid. Now, I don't know what that liquid was. I'm not suggesting that they were performing human sacrifice. There's no evidence of that. I don't think they did. But at least it served as some kind of libation ceremony. Um, and um, and so I think, when they find the fragmented skulls in these enclosures, you don't take the whole body into the enclosure. You know, I think there's, they leave the body. There's evidence that about a year later they remove the heads, and all you need is the head of your ancestor to take back into these enclosures. There were drill holes through the top of the skulls, I think, that were used to suspend the skulls, and then at least some kind of libation ceremony. We do know that they were practicing ritualistic feasting. They had big stone vaults, vessels there that they used to store the barley that fermented into beer. And so we do know that there's evidence of this huge megalithic feasting that they were having there at the site. And look, when you're venerating and deifying these ancestors through their stones, uh, through some kind of libation ceremony or worship, um, uh, you are this is the very beginnings of Baal worship, where you have deified these two central ancestors. This is why in Jeremiah it says, "Don't say to the stone, or to the wood that you're my father, and to the stone you gave birth, to me." These are exactly why these things were forbidden. But if shamanism goes back to the very old uh, religious practice of using some psychedelic or altering mind altering medicine to put you into the spirit world. This is, I think, probably pretty similar to what we see at Göbekli Tepe, where they're trying to put themselves back into a spiritual state where they have lost it in the garden. And the only
Mhm.
way to get back to that connection in their mind, I think, and their, at least their cosmology worldview, is to be rebirthed back through your mother ancestor Eve. And so whatever that, whatever it took to get your ancestor to see them on through to the afterlife, where they're reborn, actually rebirthed and reborn as a star god. And
Mhm.
so this all goes back to the Watcher influence again. We see that the Watchers had came down on Mount Hermon, and they influenced men in several different areas. At least 200 of them at the time did these things. So this all goes back, I think, to the very beginnings of probably what you're talking about in shaman worship, of how people are already, at least in, and this, you could put this in right in Genesis, the time period of Göbekli Tepe, they have already begun to worship other gods and being led astray.
Does this so have you much have you looked into DMT and what people were saying about it? Have you looked into that at all?
I have not, no.
Well, if you get an opportunity, you'll have to check this out. But people are claiming to see the same entity. It's almost like a feathered serpent. Of course, they're calling it Mother Aya. Maybe I can't remember. I think it's like for ayahuasca because DMT is the chemical produced from the ayahuasca plant that kind of looks like a vine, like a DNA vine going up a tree.
Hmm.
And they give it to people, and everyone who is claiming to do this is having spiritual, supernatural occurrences within these things, and some even getting messages, seeing entities almost. And people that describe this are describing it as an encounter with the supernatural. And they're not talking about like you're hallucinating. They're like, they literally believe they are in that spiritual realm when they're there. I actually had the opportunity to speak with a rabbi. He was on this documentary about DMT. Joe Rogan and all them were on it. And this rabbi believed this was a spiritual practice that, and he's a different kind of rabbi than a lot of rabbis you might talk to, but in the way he was the head rabbi of like somewhere in Colorado near Denver. I think it was Manitoba Springs, I believe is the name of the place he was the head. He just died like last year, year before, but he was saying that this is the way to go tap into the spiritual and release the divine name, all these weird stuff, man. There's people that really believe this and it's huge. Joe Rogan is really pumping it out. Lots of influencers are telling people to do it, and a lot of people have claimed it's changed their life. And so I wonder if that was the religion of the Watchers. This is how they did it, because even in modern occultism like Crowleyism and Jack Parsons, they part of their rituals were to induce this state with drugs or whatever. So it's
Hmm.
wild when you really think about all that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a possibility. The Watchers, they in the book of Jude, it says that they left their first estate, which means that they
Mhm.
entered into a physicality that they had to die like men at the end
Mhm.
of it. They could not go back to their first estate. Once they crossed that barrier, it was a forbidden barrier. They crossed it, and when they did, they died a natural death. Um, and a tenth of them become disembodied spirits on the earth, and then the majority gets chained underneath the earth. Um, Again, this gets more into the specifics of all this and the apocryphal books, especially in the book of Enoch and the book of Jasher and Jubilees. But um, there could be some kind of something like this that they're doing. I just don't know. There's other than the big stone vats at Göbekli Tepe, there's really no evidence of anything else.
Mhm.
But look, when you have this with this influence, either way, whether it's a physical incursion and a physical intervention, or through these kind of mind altering drugs or whatever, the veil is thin, and just like in Daniel, if you can peel that veil back and see behind the scenes, I think we would be terrified. You know, and so I think what these people are experiencing is probably a real experience for them. I'm not doing that, but look, they're seeing this feathered serpent, female entity, whatever it is. In the book, in the back of the book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, I bring it forward to why is it relevant now? Because there is a deity that people are seeing that's been verified by the Catholic Church, and this entity is called the Lady, and it's all about divine feminism. Um, and so we get into that about this experience that people are having with the Lady, and I'm wondering if that is connected with this, with what you're talking about and what people are experiencing there. But whatever it is, I think it's probably real.
Mhm.
But look, that's not something that I don't think we should be tapping into. We have a
I think so either.
um, I think we have a spiritual source through God the Father that protects us from, and we're not fighting against flesh and blood here, against
Mhm.
principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and when you look at these, and I detail them actually in the book, um, these are hierarchies of power in positions of authority in the
Mhm.
heavenlies. Some of them are in the heavenlies, like principalities or over nations. You get to mites, which are local, and you get to things that are really under the earth as well, so above and below. But we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. So there's at least a lot of spiritual warfare going on here. Whether you're going all the way back to Göbekli Tepe in Genesis or bringing it forward to today, it's still the same old entities, maybe through a different way, perhaps, that are influencing the culture. And we have to be very, very careful and do what the Bible says, guard our hearts and our minds against these things, because if it was possible, even the very elect would be deceived. So we have to really be on guard about that and stay with the standard of truth, John, and that's the word of God.
I believe that too. Thank you, Aaron, so much for that. Let people know how they can contact you, where they can get your book, etc. I know you have a website and you have a email that you send out. I get your email, I think once a week, maybe even more than that
Yeah,
sometimes. And so let people know how they can be on that because it's super interesting stuff. And I really think like you're one of my, I consider you a friend, man. I've known you for a while, but I know we don't hang out a whole lot, but you're somebody that I can always count on to do good work. I mean, I've never been disappointed in anything you've showed me or talked about. So I appreciate that. And so I don't vouch for every guest that I have on here. Aaron's one of the few that I do. So that I'll vouch for because I've listened to him over a decade or more talking about these things. A lot of guests that I have on Aaron are just people I've maybe just met. So it's like I never really can endorse a lot of what they do, but I definitely can yours. So let people know.
thank you. Yeah. You can get the new book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, Biblical Anatolian the Watcher. It's on Amazon. We do have it on Kindle. We have print version, obviously. We have a Kindle version, and now it's up on audio. If you're an Audible fan, you want to listen to your audiobook, you can do that as well. Uh, the Substack that you was talking about, the writing, yeah, I throw about an article out once a week or so, maybe twice a week. You go to aaronjudkins.substack.com, and that'll put you right there centrally to those emails I send out. They're on various topics. They're not all on archaeology, but I just try to mix it up a little bit and send out some content for you. And then if you go over to Patreon, our site is Ancient Pathways at patreon.com and just type in Ancient Pathways. A lot of free content is there for people for you to watch or download. There are a lot more content for paid subscribers as well, but we do have some pretty cool things that I've amassed over the decades, John, just in my library and my research that I'm making available on that account at Ancient Pathways, such as the book of Giants, volumes 1, 2, and 3. So if you love the Nephilim and the giants and things like this in the research, there's 20, 24, 25 articles all for immediate PDF downloads. Some of them are very difficult to find. You can just go down there and download all of those. And I have one called the Ancient Library, where you have content to another, 24 works, including the Septuagint, the complete Septuagint, including the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English, just things like that. So if you're interested in any of those things, but we have a lot of interviews, a lot of things that we've done in the past that are up on that Ancient Pathways site. So
Thanks a lot, Aaron. I appreciate
yeah.
that a ton. And I'm going to get those links in the description for you, so you guys can go just easily click on them and check them out. Thanks, Aaron, for coming. Guys, hit the like button, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time on Pounder's Quest.
The world keeps lying, but he won't retreat on his quest for truth. Yeah. Truth, quest for truth.